All right, let's start this thing.
Recording in progress.
Hello, 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 wonderful people who are filing in. I have a question for you to begin with while we just wait for everybody to get in here. If you could spend the next year learning about any animal in the world, and like learning a lot about any animal in the world, what might be an animal that you would consider learning about? I'm going to turn the chat on. I'm going to ask for, I have ADHD. I kind of can't stand cross chatter. It's very distracting. But I'll take, so no spam, please. And I'll kick you out of the group if you do. I will do that. I once kicked my own son out of a webinar. It was still trying to live that one down. Go ahead and chat in. What is an animal that you might consider studying if you had an entire year to learn almost everything about an animal? Oops. Getting one of my daughter's priceless papers wet right now. For this, there is no forgiveness. All right, I'm seeing answers like beaver, orangutan. I can never say that right. Orangutan. Tigers, ducks, cats, chickens, lions, tardigrades, pathetic animals. I know, unpopular opinion. Sailfish, reminder, no spam, or sorry, that's the, you like this like sound. There we go. Wolf, giant Pacific octopus, meerkats, cats, lions, squirrels, ooh, the mola. Ooh, it's the same thing as the dolphin, right? The dolphin that's a fish. It's a really big vertical, like a pancake of a fish, right? 10 feet, 12 feet tall, something like that. Leatherback turtle, green sea turtle. Fantastic answers. Look at you guys. Flatworms. Nobody has ever said flatworms before. Where I'm from, you don't study flatworms. Flatworms study you. Platypus. Yeah, the mola is a sunfish. Isn't that also called the dolphin? Maybe I'm wrong about that. All right, 5 more seconds. I know to count down from 5. Sometimes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't even know what the hammerhead worm is. Goodness. Hi, everybody. Besides not knowing what the hammerhead worm is, I'm also Brandon. I run the company Science is Weird, where, I don't know, 3-4 days a week, it's a lot. I get to take kids on these giant intellectual adventures where I toss them riddles and we try our best to figure out the answers, and kind of along the way we accidentally decipher some of the secrets of the universe. It's a heck of a lot of fun. What we're doing today is actually kind of toward a different goal than at least the ostensible goal of our Science is Weird courses is. We're going to talk about skills. So, besides being the teacher and founder of Science is Weird, I'm also a father of 2. And, I spend a lot of time obsessing, like I suspect a lot of people do, that my kids don't just learn how to read, but become avid readers and become really, really good at reading. Not just that they know how to write, but that they write. They spend their time crafting stories, crafting poems, crafting, I don't know, whatever else one writes, right? Like instructions, they end up producing things. Reading, writing, reasoning, usually say arithmetic, but really arithmetic, math is like sort of subcategory of reasoning, right? So debating, not just that they are like reading a bunch of things and writing a bunch of things, but they're actually producing ideas and engaging those ideas in conversations with other people, arguing those ideas back and forth, like actually developing real opinions on things. Sometimes I fear, rather, that that's not happening. My 2 kids, we homeschool at present, and for the foreseeable future, when my 2 kids were in school, school is not for them, right? School is for me. I did very well in school. I loved middle school, but I was bored to tears I loved elementary school, but I was bored to tears in middle school, and then to a lesser extent in high school. You'd think by this point in world history that we would have developed the methods, the tools to just routinely get people excited about learning to read and reading really well, and learning to write and writing really well, and learning to reason and reasoning really well. That we would have solved the skills problem. Probably we haven't. It seems like as a society, we can like kind of get like the median person up to a basic literacy and maybe a little bit more than that, but like really not very much more than that. And this is terrible. This is something that I, fear for my own kids too. The question is, how can we? Is there a way of actually regularly sparking in people this love of developing these basic skills of reading and writing and reasoning? Let me actually just take 20 seconds right now. If you had to try to just, somebody made you czar of all of the schools of the world everywhere, in a sentence, what might you do to get all kids everywhere really excited about working on their skills of reading, writing, and reasoning? 20 seconds. Go ahead and chat in your answers. Hit it. Add Minecraft is actually, right, like this is a thing that people have been doing. It's interesting how well that seems to work. I wish I knew more research on how, like what the limits of that are. Because there's got to be limits somewhere, right? I don't like Minecraft, so there'll be a limit for me, but man, that really works. Associate with something they're interested in. More math, more PE, you're right. Spark, the book Spark by John Rady, recommended. It's about PE. Use their interests, give them the tools to follow their passions. But what tools might those be? Tell them it's fun. This is fun, kids! And they sort of maintain that sort of garish grin for a really long time. Hands-on activities, games, working what they love, self-directed learning skills, more topics they're interested in. Look at experimentation, interests, activities, recess. Finland does a really good job with recess. 5 for proud to be 1/4 finish here. 3, 2, 1. We used to send our kids to outdoor school. They loved that. It was the only good part of their schooling week. A lot of people are saying interests. And for me, I'll call on people up at the very end of this, so you can put your hand down, but feel free to raise it at the end, and we'll do that. So for me, there was I loved reading, I loved reasoning, I loved writing, and for me the secret was dinosaurs. I just really got into dinosaurs, and I filled myself up with dinosaurs. I read, I won't say every book in our local public library about dinosaurs, but I'll say almost every book in our local public library about dinosaurs. And I wrote things about dinosaurs, did my own independent research about dinosaurs, got in arguments about dinosaurs, found arguments that other people are making in books. For me, dinosaurs were my salvation as like a proto-intellectual, because I got so deep into dinosaurs, because dinosaurs was just like my infinitely deep, like black hole interest, right? This like infinitely deep gravitational field of interest for me. I just glommed onto them. The trouble is that not everybody is interested in dinosaurs. You can't just take one topic, obviously, right? Not that anyone would suggest this and like say, everyone now be really interested in this sort of thing, right? And scaling this sort of interest, this sort of deep and desperate interest, is the trick. It is the $1,000 question. How can we scale it when somebody is just on fire for what they are really, really excited about? Think about that, actually, right now. How can we scale this? I have what actually might amount to the closest thing in today's little presentation, event, etc., that comes close to one of the riddles that we do in our actual sciences, weird science classes. For those of you who don't know, I always do, everything starts with the riddle, and they're hard riddles. Okay, here's your riddle. What 2 ingredients does an engine need to work? Think about that. Don't even take a guess yet. But what, if you had to even just like write down, like on a recipe card, what 2 ingredients does an engine need to work? Oh, what the heck? I'll give you a chance to guess that. 20 seconds. Hit it. I won't tell you if you're right at this point. Outside and quiet time, gas and oxygen, air and fuel, explosions, more explosions, fuel and fire. Yeah, it's not much of a riddle, right? Not like what we actually do in our science classes. Potential energy, gas and air, oil and gas, oil and fuel. Oil is fuel, right? Usually. Unless you make the engine itself out of frozen blocks of oil, out of fat. That would be interesting. Kind of that's what your body is, I suppose. Metals in the right conditions, parts in a motor, fuel and heat. Now, the motor is kind of the engine, right? That's what a motor is. I think. I'm not a mechanic. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're wondering, like, why are we even talking about this? Yeah, it's a metaphor. It's coming back around. Okay. I think that there is... let me just draw this in here. I feel like there is this sort of myth. I have a master's degree in education, and frankly, my entire degree was not any good. It was a waste of a degree, and I'm still kind of bitter about it. But one of the things that I got to get a handle on is, I would say, why schools don't work, because I could see the projects that people around me were working on that they would get really excited, like, this will change learning. And like at that point in my life, because I had like 2 good humanities degrees, I was able to kind of look at that and go, like, wait a second, like that doesn't, no, like those don't work. What everybody was trying to do when I was in graduate school is say, okay, like what are the skills that we want people to get? So let's take a skill and let's break those skills down into a couple sub-skills. And then let's take those skills and break those down into even more sub-skills. And let's take those skills and break those down into even more skills. That's hard. Boy, anything can become a tongue twister if you wait long enough, right? And they said, okay, the point of school is to run kids up through these things. First, have them build these sorts of skills, and then these sorts of skills, and then kind of combine them together, this kind of skill and this kind of skill. And for a while, frankly, I got really excited about this because, this is actually how skill building works in the real world. But when you're talking about working with students en masse, when you're talking about working with students that you kind of understand and kind of don't, this is a total failure, right? Because it's treating the student as if the student were an object. A subject like it's an object. It's a terrible thing to do. Instead, what we need to do in order to actually help kids fall in love with making skills, and note that I'm still focusing this on skills, right? Is to help them go deep into some kind of content. Help them find something that they are desperately in love in or can fall desperately in love in. And go really, really deep with this. How can we do this, though, en masse, right? After college, I worked for, I don't know, what I lovingly describe as a hippie school. And I love that school, and I still love that school. And they really put all of their chips into the, set kids free to find things that they really, really love. And sometimes, this is what you'll find with all sorts of situations like this, it will work amazingly well. And sometimes it really, really won't. You will have kids who graduate and have not found their passion. And everyone just kind of clucks their tongues and shakes their heads at them and said, oh, if only they have found their passion, right? It can be a terrible thing, a terrible responsibility to heap on kids. It's to say, you need to learn to find your passion. So how do you scale that? Sorry, I'm kind of repeating myself, right? We're kind of going into the same things. Then I toured a school in Northern Oregon that changed my life forever. It was Corbett Charter School. I believe it no longer exists. It got really political in the local environment. Local schools obviously always have this sort of problem. To walk into Corbett, I and a friend and my wife, we all went down from Seattle down to Corbett together, and we took a close look at exactly what it was they're doing. And I'm going to tell you the truth. It would have been possible to go and visit this place and not notice the amazing things that they were doing. If you walked in their hallways, you'd say, okay, there's some things going on there, right? There's some fish, there's a river sort of project that they're doing or something like that. And then maybe you look more closely and you say, okay, they're doing more than just local fish. They also have the local prehistoric animals that lived in Oregon in the Mesozoic era, right? So they're going a bit deeper than that. But that still might not tell you the difference. You might look inside of their actual classrooms and see that all their classrooms had timelines in them that help them take all of the really cool things that they were learning and put them up in one place so they can actually reason about them, right? There's a thickness of learning that was going on here. And that was good. That was actually, in some ways, that was really amazing. And it was part of the secret sauce, but it wasn't the major part of the secret sauce. I will tell you that when I went to this elementary school and talked with their kids, I have never, ever, ever, no exceptions, seen groups of kids so excited to learn, so passionate about the things that they were learning about than I have at this school. This is all the more surprising because this, I can't say the specifics here because it's been too long. But sometimes when you find a school, sometimes especially elite private schools, who like all the kids are so fascinated in everything, right? Yeah, there's a selection effect going on there, right? So those sorts of schools tend to attract from a really big catchment area kids who are really passionate about things. But this school was just a local charter school. They were just drawing from kids who lived in the local city, in my memory of this. So what the heck was the secret sauce? 20 seconds, just because it's fun. Go ahead and take a guess. Was it like literally some secret sauce that they were putting on the mashed potatoes in the lunchroom? Do you think it was something that they were putting on the water? Do you think it was weird mind controlling music that they were playing over the PA system that like influenced their brains to become more right? Like, because whatever it is that they were doing, like if you could scale this, holy crap, right? Like this would change the world. Fun, lots of fun. I will tell you that the kids were having fun. I know that because I spent a couple days talking to them. But like it's not like they were playing a lot more games than other kids were. In some ways, it looked like a very ordinary, I don't even say traditional, just a very ordinary school. Passionate educators. They actually did get really passionate educators for this. They put the call out. I was visiting them in part because I was really interested in maybe moving down and becoming one of their teachers. And then I realized I think I can actually like figure out how they're doing this and do this somewhere else too. 10 seconds left. Activities. Almost everything counts as an activity is the trouble with that, right? Kids have agency in choosing the next step to learn, choose your own adventure in learning. You know what's interesting? Not really. It was structured fairly simply, although in one respect, Leaf and Finn, yes. Magic! The answer was magic. I will say that yes, the answer was magic. Okay, so here's what they were doing. This is part of it that I was not able to see because this only happened once a year. Their incoming, I think it was their first grade class, not their kindergartners. Though frankly, at this point in this spot of remove, I'm not entirely sure. They had a ceremony. The entire school would show up, and they'd have this ceremony where they would pick out of, if I'm remembering this correctly, pick out of a hat or a bag a subject, and it might be apples. It might be shoes. It might be the moon. It might be carousels. It might be bears. And they would give randomly this subject to each of the first graders. Each first grader would randomly be assigned a subject. And that was their subject. The job was for the next 5 years, 12 years ideally, the school ran 5 years, they would have a few hours, I think it was every Friday or something, just to kind of like research that topic, learn more about that topic. The incredible thing was, this is Bob and Sherry Dunton, by the way, who are the principal and one of the teachers of the school, now live in Texas. I should have invited them to this. Bob and Sherry, if you're watching this on recording right now, hi, you're wonderful. I mean, that was it. Like, what else do I say with it? That was it. They had this opportunity. This doesn't sound like it should be able to spark so incredible much passion in students. It's a flipping assignment, right? It is given to them. This seems like the opposite of them following their passion. Taking it on faith at the moment, this is actually what was going on here. Why would you guess that this would spark in the kids this desperate love of learning that then translated to virtually everything else that they did? 20 seconds, take a crack at it. they became experts. In fact, was part of the sort of the quest that they were on, was to become an expert, an actual sort of expert, in the sense that somebody who knows, most of the things that other experts know about it, most of the things that ordinary people know, and then a whole bunch of things that ordinary people don't know about it. But then also like maybe make some discoveries themselves, and actually maybe connects together pieces of information to make some realizations, some understandings that literally nobody else in the world knows about this. That they keep digging deeper into the topic to impress, right? There actually is, I think, some sort of egotistic sort of a role of this. 5, 4, rabbit holes of learning through one thing experts. I love the idea of rabbit holes for there. 1. They became really good at one thing, Piper says. Yeah, I really like that. Learn to closely examine, Ashley says, one thing and look at it from different angles. Yeah. So this whole project, this whole approach, is called Learning in Depth. It comes from the greatest educational thinker ever. I think that is I will stake my reputation and my life on that being literally true. Kieran Egan just passed away earlier this year. Recommend this book very, very highly if you were interested in doing this. This presentation is not about learning in depth. Here's a picture of Kieran Egan. This presentation is about something totally, totally different. Zoology in depth. Okay, so here's how I mean this to be different. This is definitely, when I say totally different, I'm making fun of myself. My wife and I used to be in charge of the elementary school curriculum of a startup school outside of Seattle. And what we really wanted to do was sell a school and learn in depth. But that was kind of too big of a thing for us to start with. So what we decided to do was start with a 1-year project of zoology in depth. Here's what it is, just as simply as possible. There's just 3 steps. By the way, if you were taking notes, this might be one of the things that you actually want to write down. First pick, then learn, then show. Make sense? No, of course it doesn't. Not nearly enough information. Okay, so the first step is to actually pick an animal. Zoology, the study of life, zoe, specifically animal life, zoe in Greek. So what I might recommend, if you just wanted to take a crack at this, is to start by taking 3 animals that you, if you are a kid, or your kid, if you are not a kid, but the proud owner of a kid, might like to do. I do recommend, so say for example, it might be sloths, or it might be Komodo dragons, or it might be dinosaurs. Macaws in this case. Take 3 animals and then write them down on a piece of paper, crumple up the pieces of paper, put them in a hat. Does anyone still have hats? A bag, whatever, and pick them out in some sort of official ceremony. And then whichever one you happen to pick, let's just say randomly it was the sloth, that is the animal that you are in charge of becoming an expert in, or trying to become an expert in, learning the heck out of for the next year. Does this make sense so far? You're thinking, well, why then do more? Why not just pick one here? Kieran Egan was really big on the topics not being things the kids actually chose. Because he reasoned, I think from experience, that anything that you choose personally, you can unchoose. You're sort of resting the whole weight of the project on your own choice. And, this is a very sort of modern, sort of American, if I can speak, sort of thing, right? The great bold individual who, existentialist hero who decides everything themselves. But that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of weight. There's something wonderful about the choice either being made for you or kind of being made for you. Because then it's easier to stick with something when you are no longer interested in it. And I'll say that when I talked to the kids who were at Corbett Charter School, it was, oh my gosh, to talk with them was like talking to a wise scholar. I remember talking to one of them who said noodles or something was hers. I don't know. I think she was talking with me about macaroni, but I think it was one of those things where really her topic was clowns, and somehow macaroni was related to clowns, her some weird way. And so she had like 3 months where she like went off and like learned about macaroni and clowning or something. But I asked her and a bunch of other kids, like, what happens when you get, like, do you ever get bored in your topics? And they all said, a lot of them that I remember said, oh, yeah. But, you know, like, you go through periods of boredom and then you get interested again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is like talking to a marriage counselor and like talking about like what a really good marriage is like. Yeah, you know, like sometimes you're in love with each other and like sometimes you're not. And then like sometimes you're in love with one another again. The important thing is like not get a divorce the second that you fall out of your love, you're being in love with one another, right? It's like zoom out and recognize like, yeah, like human emotions are these sort of fickle things. Oh, it's so cool. And I think that part of what helped them stick with it was the fact that this choice had been made for them. If you want to do that and just totally pick a random animal for your kids, right? You can do that. I think a nice sort of halfway point, I think I maybe got this from the Duntons, I'm forgetting, is to let them choose a couple, 2 or 3 different animals that they would be interested in, and then like having them like pull it out at random. So you have both those elements in there. Great. So step number 1 is just to pick an animal. Wonderful. Step number 2 is to begin to learn about the animal. Okay, so here you might find some friction. I don't know if your kids are like my kids. Every single time that I have some sort of amazing idea of this thing that we're going to do is going to make your entire homeschooling amazing, they're like, no, I will never. I would rather have my fingers bitten off by bears one by one than chew the thing that you are telling me to. I don't know if this happens to anybody else. I wish it didn't happen to me. So you want to find some sort of really easy way of beginning to get into the learning about this, right? And here is where, more than anything, YouTube can be so wonderful for this. YouTube is a cesspool of crap. It's just the most garbage videos. But if you know how to find great videos on YouTube, if you know which channels to like, if you can train the algorithm to give you, almost only good channels, YouTube is the most human science teacher you can ever have. I'm working on an essay right now called YouTube, the most human science teacher, where I go through and give and kind of rank YouTube science channels. The ones that I recommend to begin with for this, for Zoology in Depth, are 2 of them. Animal Logic is just really, really fantastic. So here, let me actually just go to my YouTube app. So I would say Animal Logic. It's all kind of one word right there. And then I'll type in one of the animals that people would suggest me for. Let's go for tardigrade. I have no idea if they actually have one. Yes! Okay. Great. So tardigrades, the most resilient animals in the universe. And I could go and I could watch that right now. Animal Logic will always give you trustworthy facts. It'll be really interesting. They'll go really in depth, right? They'll not just like do like a bunch of like crappy superficial facts. Although frankly, right, like depending on where you're starting, just a bunch of superficial facts would not be a terrible thing. All of the TED Ed is really good. SciShow is really fantastic, but there aren't that many SciShow videos about animals. Anything from the BBC is good. Journey to the Microcosmos is fantastic for this. Anything from, this is not related now, but PBS ENs is what I want to recommend. Then the other one that you should look up in YouTube to begin with this is, I will say this is the most unknown YouTube channel that flipping everybody in the world needs to know about. I think that the channel Kurzgesagt, actually, it's probably a better channel because, Kurzgesagt. But Tierzoo is not nearly as popular as Kurzgesagt. It's not nearly as famous. Oh, it's so good. Okay, so just look up Tierzoo. 1 word, 2 words, I don't know. I'll look up Tierzoo and tardigrades. Great. And I will find the first one there are water bears OP, overpowered. I will just, there's a sloth one's there too. I forgot about that. So I will just say that Tierzoo is so incredibly good because it takes this stupid metaphor to the hilt. The metaphor that it uses is that what we call life around us is actually just a video game. All of the characters are players. All the different species are character types. If I'm right, I think I'm slightly getting that wrong. They do some trees too, not just animals. And what else? And then like every kind of animal has different abilities, like stealth and like strength and like intelligence. Right? This sounds like an RPG, a role playing game. Let me just look up Tier Zoo and go to their channel. Click on their channel here. Greats and videos. Greats. Why is this so good? Okay, because there are typically two ways that we look at ecosystems and how animals and plants and whatever interact with one another. The one way is that we imagine like, oh, they're all connected to each other and they're connected in this beautiful harmony. That's not so totally wrong. That kind of is what you get at the end. But it's not like the animals are trying to help one another. The animals are actually engaged in this cutthroat competition with one another. It's one of the mysteries of the universe. I mean, like Econ 101 can tell you how this results in that. It's not really a mystery, but it's one of the weirdest things in the universe. The sort of cutthroat competition in the animal kingdom ends up in like literally the most beautiful thing ever, which is all the diversity of animals. That's one way that we look at like how animals interact with one another. Oh, they're all beautiful and harmonious, right? It's the circle of life, right? No, that's maudlin nonsense. The second way, maybe like the more sort of like the more sort of professional way of looking at this sort of thing, say, well, like all of these things like are sort of stable. They've reached some sort of stability with this. And we don't think about the fact that the game is always up for grabs, that every animal is always trying to beat all of the other animals and win the game. That all of this is constantly in flux. Using the stupid metaphor, it gets irritating sometimes. The hippos one is so good. Using the stupid metaphor of it's all a video game opens up what is actually going on in ecosystem biology, and it's incredible. Literally, you can do no better if what you really want to do is learn about animals and ecosystems, just to watch as many of the Tier Zoo videos that seem interesting to you. Oh, it's good. Okay, I'll stop talking and gushing about that. So, I recommend the first thing that you do to start learning about your animals, go to Tier Zoo, go to Animal Logic, and start watching some videos on this. At this point, it might be a really great idea to, start taking notes on these things. One great way of taking notes would just be to write down like your source and then like some notes from each of those things. There are other ways of doing this that I will go into in a few minutes, but like that is not a dumb way of doing that. If you want to do that by hand, you can draw pictures then also with this. I can work on penmanship, handwriting. But you can do this on a computer too. And I'd be even interested in talking about some different ways of doing this. The next source that I might recommend, just being really easy, right? You could literally like do these first steps on this just today. The next place that I would recommend, you might think it would be Wikipedia, and you're almost right about that. Does anyone want to know the specific type of or can anyone guess what the specific type of Wikipedia is that I recommend beginning with? I'll give you 10 seconds. I'll give you a hint. It's technically a language on Wikipedia. 5, 4, 3. Latin! 3, 2, 1. Computer language! It's Dutch. I think you should go to Dutch Wikipedia. That would be dumb. Why would you do that? Do you know about Simple English Wikipedia? It's amazing. Sometimes it's not amazing. Frequently it is. Here's the deal. Do I have it up here? So, go to regular Wikipedia. This is my iPad for Wikipedia. And I go for, I don't know, orcas. My daughter is learning about orcas this year. So you look at this and you're like, okay, the orca are killer whales, a toothed whale belonging to the oceanic dolphin family, of which it is the largest member. It is the only axant species of the genus Orcinus. Possibly the word orcs is influenced by that. It is recognized by its black and white patterned body, cosmopolitan species, blah, 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 had diverse diet, blah, 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 blah. Goes on, goes on, goes on, goes on. Okay. Here, this is, I don't know, like this is This isn't terribly hard to... Hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. This seems easier than I thought. What am I? I'm sorry. I'm hitting this button. This button is supposed to be... Oh, no, I'm hitting the wrong button. That's right. Yeah, okay. This is just the regular one. Okay. Very good. Very good. If this is too hard for you, frequently the Wikipedia... This isn't so bad. Frequently Wikipedia articles are terrible. They're just written like so that the only people who can understand them are the people who already know everything about them. I mean, I even look for another animal. What's another animal that we had said about before, or come up with an idea for before? Tardigrades. They are a phylum of 8-legged segmented microanimals. They're first described by a zoologist, that person who called them little water bears. Then this, those steppers. This, you know what? I'm kind of proud. This is not as bad as their articles typically are, but you can make it easier. The way that you do them is you hit the languages button. On an iPad, it's a button. There are different ways of doing this or whatever. And, like I could say like Afrikaans. And now I have the Dutch version. It's not really Dutch. It's just Afrikaans. It's practically Dutch, right? And you can see this, and you can learn Afrikaans. That's not useful. Okay, I don't know why I showed you that, except that this is in the language thing. I scroll down to the S's, Simple English, click on here. And now we have the simple version of this. This is a separate thing. It was written by real people who may or may not know what the original English version is of it. So it's not for sure that the same information will be on both of these. Tardigrades are microscopic segmented animals that live in water. They're members of the tactopod phylum. That's actually worse than the original one was. Part of the superphylum. Bleh, it's worse than the original was. They're also known as blah, blah, blah. But now you get, in a relatively short space, the most interesting, most important animal facts about water bears, about tardigrades, which is great. Okay, so Simple English, Wikipedia, or even like the regular English or whatever language you want to speak. Let me not tell you what language to speak. Wikipedia article, a great next place to go with this, and this is something that you can do without leaving your house. The next step after that I recommend, and this is a weird one, this is regardless of how old you are. If you are 40 years old, this is a great next step, okay? The next step is to go to your local library, go to the children's section, and check out all of the books on your animal. If it's like cats, if your animal's cats, right, there might be like literally 50 books on your animal. If you live in a big library, next to a big library, like it might be like even more than that, right? Okay, so maybe not all of them. But like almost all of the books on it, like 10 or 20 books on it. Why? Because you will very quickly be able to read them, right? Like a lot of the kids' books are designed to literally be read in like 4 minutes. When you start seeing the same information again and again and again and again, you will, first of all, feel really irritated. Second of all, feel kind of cool because you'll know like, okay, like, I have definitely crossed this level. Third of all, know what at least like the consensus is among people who write kids' books about animals as to what the most important information on the animals is. And in fact, sometimes you will notice that information is not the same from one place to the other, which is already really cool, right? You're already kind of like crawling your way, I guess like running, sipping, hopping your way to the top of like a discourse community, right? And you're seeing, you're going to be able to look down your nose at the people who are writing these books and say, well, actually, like this author or this author, they get kind of some of their facts wrong. If you think, oh man, I really like to take notes on all of these books, great, you can do that. If you're like, that sounds like be really irritating, great, don't do that. There's really nothing that you must do for any of this. The only thing that we stick with this is that the Zoology In-Depth project has to be done for at least a year. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but right, the way that we're defining this, it sticks for at least a year and maybe even more than that. 12 years would be really cool. After you get through that level of stuff, all sorts of new things open up for you. My personal recommendations in this would be next to try to find a documentary about your particular animal. At this point in human history, there really are documentaries on most animals, or at least so it seems to me, some made in the last few years, right? So go ahead and watch a documentary. If you're like, no, reading is more important. Okay, right? Reading has the written word has its strengths. Visual, I'll just say video, has its strengths too. And when you're talking about animals, I'm actually going to argue that you don't really know what a sloth is until you see a zillion videos of sloths, right? Because how they move and how they look and like the details of their, you can read books, you can look at still pictures, but they don't really get you to an understanding the way that a video will immediately get you that understanding. So go to documentaries. And then after going through all the kids' books and all the documentaries, not even all the necessarily the documentaries, but a bunch of documentaries if you can, you're going to be ready to actually move up to the adult book level. And here's you walk into the scary, if you're a kid, right? The scary part of the library. I did this with dinosaurs, right? Like it was only after I had read all of the kids' books on dinosaurs, except for the stupid little kids' books, because I was way too cool to read those. I'm like, oh, like how can I continue getting my dinosaur fix? My dad said, like, well, go over to this part. I'm like, I can't go over there. Those shelves are very tall. There are adults there. They might see me, right? Okay, great. So you go, you find out where in the Dewey Decimal System the dinosaurs are, and you find out where your specific type of dinosaur is. By the way, just as a aside for this, if you wanted to make your animal dinosaurs, don't do it. Not because they're extinct, because dinosaurs are not an animal in the same way that mammals are not an animal, right? Pick a specific dinosaur. So go to the adult section. And then you can do, what we in the biz call a book tasting. For those of you who are part of our science class, right, you know what a book tasting is. It's where you sit down with a book and you just set a timer for 5 minutes and you look at the front and you look at the back and you look at the inside covers and you look at the index and you look at the table of contents and you flip randomly through the book. Just looking, not trying to understand the entire book, but just trying to figure out, is there anything that I can find out in these 5 minutes that seems interesting? All the while you are very, you're being very critical. You're being mean. You are judging this book and trying to say, are you good enough for me? The book can be amazing and still not be for you, right? Really what you're trying to figure out is like, are you the right book for me to connect with right now? So you can go to the library, you can look at a stack as tall as you are about adult books on whatever your animal is. Probably don't, if your animal's crow, don't just look in books on crows, look in books on birds too. And talk to the librarian even, right? They can like point you to other parts of the library that you might not think about would have books on your animal. But you can go through that stack, and like spend 5 minutes on each of those books and then put them into the take home and the throwback parts of your table, right? And then you can come home with this big stack of books. And it's delicious, delightful time. Some of my happiest times every month is when I come home with multiple bags of books and get to do my book tasting. After you find a book, adult book that speaks to you, like one that you could, what the Charlotte Mason people, I think, would call this living books, right? A book that is actually like, it has a perspective and has beauty, has grace, has true or true-ish facts, and is worthy of your reading all the way from one corner to another. Try to find one of those suckers, right? Then it can be time for you to go beyond that. You know what? Let me actually just say something right now. And that is that when we talk about reading skill, because this entire presentation is ostensibly on skills. When we talk about reading skill, I think people don't usually understand what that really means. There's a fantastic book called Why Don't Students Like School by the cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham. Let me just pull that up right now. Why Don't Students Like School? And I want the Amazon page for it. And I don't know, I've read this book so many times. If you are interested in cognitive psychology, this is the book that you probably should start with, frankly. It doesn't really show the entire thing. Here we go. Works at the University of Virginia. One of the things that he talks about is how we think that reading is a skill. And it is, kind of is, right? More than most things, reading is a skill. But what is it that separates people who can read a little bit and people who can read really well? You'd think it would be like, oh, like there's the people who can read really well, their skills are better. Well, there's this famous test that separated, I guess I need to go like this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Famous study that separated kids into two different groups. Kids who were great readers and kids who were lousy readers. I'm not happy with those colors. I'm more happy with those colors now. And kids who knew only a little bit about baseball from kids who knew a lot about baseball. Like, why baseball? Hold on. And then they gave all of the kids a story or a text or something about baseball. Okay. And then they gave them a test afterwards to see, okay, who best understood, who can get the most questions on this right. Okay. Call this group 1, call this group 2, call this group 3, call this group 4. Which of these 4 groups do you think did the best on this test of baseball? Just chat in one number. I'll give you 10 seconds. Go for it. 5, 4, 3. The group that did the best at this was group 2. The group who had already kind of tested as being really good at reading and who knew a lot about baseball. And that makes sense, right? Okay, which of these groups do you think would do the worst on the baseball test afterwards? See who understood the text the most. 10 seconds, go for it. I like how everyone before thought that this is a trick question. Now people are realizing it's not. 2, 1. The people who did the worst on it were the people who before had tested at being bad at reading and only knew a little bit about baseball. These were the worst. These are the worst on this. Here's the kicker. Which group do you think did the next to best, the second best on this test about how well they understood this reading passage about baseball? Go for it. 3, 2. And here we're divided. I feel like the sort of the intuitive answer would be that, oh, this is a reading test. So they would be, it's the people who, like, who cares how much they knew about baseball? Like, they were the good readers, right? So it would be group 1 who would do the second best. But in reality, it wasn't. It was the people who scored, who were previously identified as the bad readers, but who happened to know a lot about baseball. And in fact, it wasn't even close. Group 4 scored about as well as Group 2 did. And Group 1 scored about as well as Group 3 did, which seems to suggest that reading is less of a skill than really a test of how much knowledge you have about something. It's possible to press this point too far, but most people don't know that this point is probably the big gorilla in the room, that this is most of what's going on when we talk about how good people are at reading. There is attention, there are eye issues, right? There really are other things that we can talk about, but those things are maybe not as important. Sorry, now this is getting really sloppy. Take all this off here. Those things aren't as important. So the amazing thing about first reading all the kids' books and then, and watching a bunch of videos, some documentaries, and only then going to the adult books is that if we think about how hard a book is and how good your skill is at reading. Here's difficulty of a text in your reading. Ordinarily, you want to match the difficulty of the text to your skill, but this is a way of actually rocketing up and getting to really high difficulty reading materials, even though your skills of a reader are not that well developed. You can read the big hard stuff and fast if you just focus on one topic. And all the better if it's something that actually, right, like you have grown to love. All right, what are we even looking at right here? Oh, you can throw some other things in here too, right? You can talk about trying to find a poem about the animal or multiple poems. You can talk about, we haven't talked about like go to Google and like look up websites on your animal. Part of that is because, man, like there's just so many websites on everything. And, like some of them are really great and some of them are really, really, really bad. We'll tell you false information, will like skew you. Like even if all the information is true, they'll take some sort of like political stance on the animal rights or whatever, like things that you want to avoid. My suggestion is that you only want to actually delve into like the random Google results for your animal once you develop some middling level of expertise. And then you can tell what is the good information, what is the bad information, or at least begin to tell that. You might, at this point, try to go on a little quest and say, like, what is the best website about my animal? I don't want to say one final thing. Another thing that you can do by this time that you once you're judging websites and getting all snooty about them, is you can actually find an expert. Maybe somebody who made a video that you liked. Maybe somebody who was interviewed in a documentary that you liked. Maybe somebody who wrote one of the books that you liked. And send them an email with some question that you have about your animal that you've never been able to find an answer for. Hence, if they work for a university, their email address is going to be really easy to find. Otherwise, it might be impossible to find. This is cool, right? And now you can begin to learn how to craft, like the fine and subtle art of crafting an email that actually gets responses. I'd be happy to share thoughts on this, but this is something I've gotten really good at. All right, so the whole goal on this thing was to develop mad skills to help people go deep into learning and understanding something so that these skills sort of naturally emerge. The really distasteful metaphor that is in my mind for this is that I got to the point where I was able to write really well and I was able to reason really well was because and I was able to read really well about almost anything, is because I had stuffed myself full. No, I had overstuffed myself, right? Like imagine me like with my belly swelled out 5 feet in every direction, right? With content, with stuff about the world. And it's maybe only when you are overfilled with something about the world that then those skills begin to just sort of make themselves happen. Dare I say naturally? It's not always naturally with people. But it's so much better than just trying to force everything like this, which is the tradition. I don't say the traditional. It's actually not the traditional way. It's what schools have been really invested in doing for a long time. If our goals are reading, okay, the skills that we're looking to develop in ourselves or our kids are reading. Okay, great, we've been talking about that a lot. If they're writing, if they're reasoning, okay, we haven't talked about those quite so much, so let's talk about this. Here's what I recommend that you do. It's kind of the next point to your ZID project, your Zoology in Depth. And actually, let me show you the recipe. Where are you? Behold ZID. Waha! Right? We've talked about the pick step, we've talked about the learn step, and now comes the show step. As you're beginning this, mark your calendar. Whatever year. You can wait for a few thousand years if you'd like. Little reference there to the Kurzgesagt calendar. Everybody who knows this calendar knows the joke here. And say, okay, like you can make your own schedule. I'm not going to suggest what you do, but right, like maybe like every couple of weeks, you put something on there for something that you should be showing. Some maybe new way that you will be showing some of the stuff that you've learned. Here's a random list of crap that maybe you'd want to do from like easiest to hardest with this, right? Like you'd want to like write a paragraph. You'd want to write a bunch of paragraphs. You want to write a bunch of pages. You'd want to actually compose your own poem. Want to make a heck of a lot of drawings. And if you're the sort of person who's like, no, I want to get to the stinking drawings faster. Yes, great. Then put that first. Make poster projects on these things. There's fine and subtle art, right? Multimedia. Do a verbal presentation or a PowerPoint presentation, right? And do that. Actually make yourself a YouTube video. We could even like add on to this something like you should then go back and you should like edit the simple English Wikipedia Wikipedia. Add some of the coolest things that you know and put them in there. Actually give back to not the scholarly community, but like the popular community about doing all this. Wow! That's the show part. And this is then what develops those skills of writing. And because you're bringing together all these sources, it is what develops those skills of reasoning as well. This is the idea. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a couple more things. Right now, I'm going to turn the chat on. I invite everybody to put in only, don't say goodbye, don't say anything else, just only put in questions that you'd like me to answer. You can also raise your hand, and I will talk about things. I can answer questions like that too. Yeah, okay, so go ahead and chat stuff in here. Sorry, chat questions for me in here. I'll say a couple more things. One is that when my wife and I were doing this at a school, I was really proud of myself for like 15 seconds when I made up for their zoology in-depth projects a bunch of questions, and I made it into a packet. Simple questions. Body, what does it look like? Can you draw it? You can probably tell me this here. Body, how long and tall and wide is it? How much does it weigh? What's something else that weighs about that much? What does its head look like? Can you draw it? What do its teeth look like? What does its teeth look like? What does its teeth? I only learned English a couple of years ago after this. Can you draw one? What do its arms or legs or limbs look like? Can you draw it? Does it have hooves or claws? Yeah. Allison asks, can you do this with any subject? Yes, absolutely. And that is where learning in depth is actually really fantastic. Learning in depth, if you, I'm going to send out, if you haven't gotten already, you will be getting Egan's essay on learning in depth. And then I should also be including that email, the list of like 113 things that he came up with that really seemed to work amazingly. He actually had a bunch of cool criteria as to like what would be really great for this, right? Like it should have like French Dadaist literature is probably not really great for a learning in depth project, right? You need to be really smart already. You know a lot about the world to even begin to understand that, right? Whereas clowns are probably easier to start with or something like that. And can be like addressed from history and from science and from whatever. So yeah, I'll send out a list that includes those things. So I came up with a bunch of questions like this, and I'll send this out too. Things about their behavior. What this is designed to be is just, I misprinted this so it doesn't work, but like, supposed to be able to like fold it in half and then staple it along here. So you have this like little booklet. You can just write little answers to these things in. I was really proud of this for like 15 seconds because I'm like, oh my gosh, like these are the best questions. I gotta tell you, these are not the best questions. There are so many questions that you can ask, and so many of them are so good that, like if this is helpful for you to start with, great, and I'll probably send it out. I'll probably include this in the email that I send to everybody who gets this. But very shortly, you probably want to be taking your own notebook and writing at the top of every page your own question, and then leaving the entire page to write answers for this. One thing I wanted to say, another thing I want to say, is that I am seriously considering, preparing this presentation has got me really excited about this again. And excited about the power of doing this. If you note, when we first advertised this was just about how could you help your kid learn a lot of biology through one animal, right? But really, the payoff of this is so much bigger than just like, how can you learn a lot of biology? How can you learn a lot of science? It really is, how can you massively advance your abilities as a reader, a writer, and a reasoner by relatively quickly becoming something like an expert, a local expert on a topic. This is weirdly similar, actually, to some advice that I've heard the author Cal Newport, give on how to get into a college that you otherwise would not be able to get into, is become an expert and a doer towards something that you end up specializing in high school or in middle school and high school. That, like other people just like look at you and they're like, how are you so what? How did you get to this spot? Zoology in depth, learning in depth too, can be like a way of like rocketing to that. I will say that just on the notion that you learn about one animal, you learn about a lot of animals, right? Like you might think, oh, if I learn about tardigrades, like then I'd have to go back and like redo this if I wanted to learn about snails or wanted to learn about skunks or whatever. No, weirdly. So I showed you my daughter's one of these. This is my son's. There's really very, very little that is written in my son's. My son looked at this, I thought, and he's like, I don't want to do this. This is terrible. There is a little bit in here that my wife was able to sort of like press him to do, and then she took dictation because he was reading a lot of books or whatever from this. He's doing Foxes right now. Written a lot. He's sorry, not written a lot of books. He's read a lot of books in Foxes. Here's the interesting thing. Last night, he watched a single video. I forget the channel. It wasn't Tier Zoo. On electric eels. And he fell desperately in love with electric eels. And all of the work that he's been doing in learning about foxes has prepared him for learning so much about electric eels and just like having like, all these categories are ready in his mind from learning about foxes to fill in with how electric eels do things. So last night, we were like supposed to go to a party. We were like late for the party because he just like had to finish writing this essay on electric eels. My son is not a natural writer. My daughter is. My son is not a natural writer. I don't talk about my kids very much. Warning, long explanation. Isn't this great? It's over, right? You can see that he spelled the word organ like Oregon, right? Like he's not a natural speller. He's not a natural reader. He's a natural reader. He's not a natural writer. But really quickly, because he's been doing his ZID projects for a couple of years, I think last year was cats, he has developed these categories. He's built himself up to understand biology so well that one video on a new animal can be the catalyst for him, just like being so full of excitement that he can't help but just like spew out all of this stuff. He has been overfilled from this. I suddenly realized just on this, we have too many metaphors in this class. Speaking frankly, what are the two ingredients that you need to make an engine run? We've been talking about the importance of learning content. And in fact, this is true, like the importance of knowledge in reading and in writing and in reasoning. Like it is, I went to graduate school, learned from a bunch of professors who had never heard of this before, and it was horrifying. But it's true. This is a very well attested fact in the psychological literature. If you want to make an engine run, you need fuel, which for us means you need content. But having a bunch of jet fuel sitting in a bucket is not going to power an engine. You also need the spark. You also need some kind of ignition. For us, this is excitement. Zoology in Depth is an attempt to load up on fuel and then to regularly be romancing this topic, right? Which is to say, fall in passionate love with it and then fall out and then keep going, because it's one thing that's kind of your choice and kind of forced upon you. You kind of like are kind of stuck in there. And I think the odds are pretty darn good for that this could really help people. Oh, I was saying before that in preparing this whole thing, I've kind of gotten excited. I'm ADHD, right? Like, so I kind of get excited by things at the time. And then I fall out of love with them, and this is fine. I kind of gotten excited about the prospects of what it would be like if next school year, so school year 2023, and then 2024, I started like a once a week, like club for kids around the world to do zoology in depth with. The aspects of it would be, I think, that I would give a little like weekly like video, like here's your challenge, like go off and like see who can get the most kids books, like how many kids books can you get from this, like what are cool things that you are learning, places for kids to share these like cool facts that they're learning about this, share their struggles with this, and I can just like give a little bit of like here's like feedback for this. my time is like, I don't have enough time to do all the projects that I want. So this would be designed very much as like a thing that I would like be spending a minimum amount of time on, but I wouldn't have to give very much time, because the entire idea about this is that it wouldn't be so like from the top sort of pressed down, nothing like the science classes that we do, which are like so energy intensive to prepare. This is something that like with some light scaffolding, like you can take and run with in whatever direction you'd like. Little weekly sort of drops in a community in which to share these sorts of ideas of how it's going for you. And then I don't know, maybe at the end even to have like people give like be able to share the YouTube videos or the presentations or the posters or whatever that they're making from this. That's the idea. This is the sort of thing where, frankly, I'm probably not going to do it because I'm excited about it now, which means I won't be excited about it in a fortnight. If you were interested in this, please shoot me an email, brandon@sciencesweird.com, and say, do this! Do a zoology in-depth thing next year! And probably if enough people do that, like, then yes, I will do that. All right. Are there any questions before we go on this? Yeah. Allison says adults need to learn to be patient, waiting for learners to discover their catalyst. Yeah. I will just say that I had also heard people take that piece of advice and make it almost their only piece of advice. And the adults were so patient that the kids never found their catalyst. That there is something that I've learned about, and right, like this reflects my own philosophy in life. So, right, like take this with a grain of salt, right? Know that there is a bias that this is coming from. But that sometimes there's a help in like putting the kid in a situation where you say, like, okay, like you have some control over this, and in some ways total control over this, almost total control over this. Like what you're reading, what books you're reading, what kind of things that you're making from week to week or whatever can be totally in the kid's control. But like we're doing this and we're picking an animal and all of that. All right. In that case, I am going to go. Everybody, thank you tremendously much for coming to this. Oh, some more questions are filling up here. I have 3 homeschooled kids. Would you have each pick their own animal or come with a group consensus? Very strongly so. My kids are not your kids. My kids are at one another's throats much more commonly than there's any sort of copacetic delightfulness going on in the household. So with my kids, it is a foregone conclusion that they has to be their own animals. So that said, I think that it's actually really wonderful for kids to do their own animals with this, in part because that allows kids to individuate, which seems to be an important psychological thing. But one of the beautiful things that happens with LID, learning in depth, not zoology in depth, LID projects in a classroom of 25 kids in a school with more than 100 kids, is that you have all of these kids who are becoming their experts in all these different things. And they will always be finding ways that their interests, that their project topics connect to one another. And so one of the really cool things to talk with these kids and just have them like shooting off their mouths on like, this aspect and this aspect and this aspect of zebras or whatever it was they're learning about, was that like to find out the projects that they had undertaken, little side projects they'd undertaken about like this person had, gosh, I should have like reviewed this list of had apples and this person had circuses. Okay, like, well, what is the overlap of apples and circuses together? Wouldn't you believe it? But there are overlaps there, or like, I don't know, apples and the moon, right? Both of them show up in Greek mythology a surprising amount of time, right? The apple of discord, anything with Selene, right? And so they can work on projects together. Also, it would be cool, since this specifically focuses on animals, to see like, oh, like this animal's habitat like is in the sea, and this animal's habitat is in the mountains, right? Or in this part of the sea, right? The pelagic zone or something like that. And this is in the mountains. Like, what are the similarities there? What are the differences? Because in our household at least, each kid ends up kind of becoming like a side expert on everybody else's animals. So you have that ability for those crossovers to happen. To do it along with your kids, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that before. That does sound like a really cool thing. Oh man, if we do this next year, maybe we should have like an adults corner for this too. Oh, wow. It's weird. I like it. Ha. Stephanie, yes, in the limited choices. My kid becomes overwhelmed with all the possibilities because her brain is so interested in everything. Yeah. Maybe my philosophy on this comes from the fact that I'm ADHD and, right, like the world is this buzzing, blooming confusion. All right, I'm going to end this. Everybody, thank you tremendously much for coming to this. I'll throw in the obligatory thing of we're beginning Wind is Weird next week. Holy crap, is it going to be amazing? Wind sounds so boring. Sounds so boring. Not sobering, so boring. And the trick is that everything that sounds, the more boring that something sounds, the more interesting it actually is. More than any of the other topics that I have been excited about going into this year. And is wind. I think wind is going to be just the most easily fascinating stuff that we learn, specifically because it sounds like we will not. That's been my experience in teaching all of the other topics in the last 3 years. I think everybody else is excited about either black holes or dogs. I think teeth. I think those would be great. Black holes was great. I think teeth sounds boring too, and it's going to be really fantastic also. All right. Sorry. I'll stop talking. Everyone, bye. Thanks.